Frankly, if I look around me, I'm a little bit scared. But anyway, looking at the kind of caliber of the people around me, so I think it's a privilege to sit here with all these people, and fortunately they're friends. Otherwise, I would be really worried. So, you know, we have an institution in Italy called Academic Quarter of an Hour, meaning that if you 15 academics have this privilege to be late by 15 minutes, but they're not late. So this is a privilege. I don't know how many centuries we have that in Italy. So basically we're not very late at the moment. We are perfectly on time. So it's a privilege to have such people around us and with us, and to have them. And thank you to all of you to come here, to take the time to come here and to present, you know, your views about the situation that is growing day by day. Probably 2-3 years ago would have been, I don't want to say meaningless, but really less important to have this panel. But today it's incredibly interesting to have you here. So we thank you also as academics. There's about 100 academics here, and to be with us. We didn't have too much preparation, I must say, which is also because the informal atmosphere of this occasion should help us to be much more fluid in our interaction. So please consider a possibility to have a very open interaction. Just to break the ice, I'm going to ask to all of you, to the 5 of you, to have 5-10 minutes, kind of to delineate, illustrate, the situation from your point of view. Of course, we can talk about the future maybe later, but in a sense, how you see the itinerary, the path that we arrived to here, why you think it's important what you are doing, in your organizations, of course, and in a sense, your views about the general sort of situation in Europe, internationally, of course, globally. And each of you has a distinctive viewpoint. I know this for sure. I will start with the institutions, and Sven, you've been the last one to arrive last night. Maybe you should be the first one to compensate, to start delineate from. Let me also introduce Sven Gentner, of course, by giving the word. Sven is the head of unit for corporate reporting, audit, ratings. Maybe I forget something else. No, that's it. And to delineate the strategy the European Commission followed in the last 2-3 years in this field of sustainability, reporting, information, and how do you see from your perspective, the path that has been made, and what were the situation, which are also the challenges of today's situation. So thank you, Sven. Thank you for breaking the ice. You have 5-10 minutes.
Sure. Well, first, thank you, good morning. And first of all, I would of course like to thank the organizers and Stefano for the great event and the wonderful setting. And just to say, I think the weather is fantastic. It's 15 degrees warmer than in Belgium, and there's much less rain. So for me, it couldn't be better. No, but back to sustainability. Well, you probably all know that in the European Union we're in the middle of a big transition, as I think are all major other countries and industries. The EU has set itself very clear goals in terms of where we want to get in terms of sustainability, carbon neutrality by 2050, alignment with the Paris Agreement, other goals, and reporting, of course, within this framework also has to play its role. We came to an agreement on a framework in June of this year, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and at the moment EFRAG, and you'll hear about that more in a moment, in a second, is developing the concrete standards that will have to be applied under this Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So what is this all about? What do we want to achieve? I mean, we have decided that in order to meet our goals, in order to mobilize financial markets for this transition, We need binding standards for all the large and listed companies to report on all sustainability measures. Financial markets need this information to take better decisions, to understand better what the viable future of a company is or isn't. We already have laws in place that require financial market participants to disclose this kind of information to their investors, and they of course in turn also need the information from the corporates, from the listed, from the large companies. This is what this is all about, and we think this is a very important piece of the puzzle to make sure that the financial markets can play their role in this transition. What will the standards do? It has already been mentioned, we are in the double materiality camp. We think it is important for the investors, but also for other kinds of stakeholders, customers, suppliers, other people that watch those companies, to understand what kind of risks they face, but also to understand what kind of impact they may have on the environment. CO2 emission, water use, loss of biodiversity, and so on. These standards that we're establishing under the CSRD have to be in line with the existing European law. I mentioned it, the Green Deal, other pieces of legislation, but we also want to align as closely as possible with international standards, because of course we understand that the companies that will have to report under these standards, they're not only active in the EU, we'll also have companies reporting under these standards from outside the EU if they have branches or subsidiaries here. So we need these standards to align as closely as possible to avoid double burden, to avoid confusion, to avoid problems that both the preparers and the investors would have in terms of applying these standards. Maybe last word, what is also important is we'll introduce an assurance requirement on these standards, because of course we need reliability, we need certainty by the ones that use these standards in terms of how the information is prepared. Final word, we think establishing a coherent set of standards has great advantages both for the preparers and for the users of the standards. For the preparers, it's hopefully going to become a one-stop shop. That means you have one set of standards in the sustainability field, and with those standards and with reporting according to them, you can provide information to your investors, to your banks, to your stakeholders, to your customers, everyone. At the moment we're seeing that companies are faced with very different kinds of demands from different stakeholders. It's very complex. We think if we get it right, if we also tailor the level of ambition right, this situation can improve. And of course for the users of the standards, to have one set where they can compare information, where they know where it comes from, where they have the similar kinds of categories according to which reporting is being done, will also be a great advantage. And again, I come back to the beginning, this will help us in this major transition that we'll all have to go through over the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Sven. Thank you, so. We will come back maybe later to the new directives coming along that also will have an impact and so on. Just for completion of the European picture, I think it's fair to now give the word to Monsieur Patrick de Gambourg, that has been the leading figure at EFRAG for various projects, and in particular, the last one was the project task force that he was coordinating, a major effort. I was also part for a few months, I think, Patrick, and of course now he's a member of the Sustainability Reporting Board, the new Sustainability Reporting Board of EFRAG, and with a concrete possibility, shall we say, that to become the chair of the Sustainability Reporting Board of EFRAG. So who can be better than Patrick to describe the situation and the path that's been made in the last couple of years from himself and EFRAG. Patrick, please, thank you.
Thank you, Stefano, and good morning to all. Thank you for the invitation. And by the way, it's an opportunity for me to pay tribute to the contribution of the Italian community to the task force, by the way, and to currently to the efforts of EFRAG, because, as you know, the Italian community is well represented in that circle. So it's the interaction is, of course, very important and extremely. It's a very good two-way traffic, and that's why I'm very glad to be here today. As Sven has mentioned, and maybe I will add one more general statement to start with, which has nothing to do, to a certain extent, directly with EFRAG, but a more high-level comment, which is the following. You know, we have lived in a world which was guided by financial reporting, okay? And the emergence through pioneers like GRI, for instance, or in the US, SASB, Jenny knows very well. Pioneering initiatives have taken place. But now, sustainability reporting is becoming mainstream. And that's one of the key points of the evolution. We are at crossroads. As a consequence, you can think about a world where, standardized corporate information would walk on two legs, the financial reporting one and the sustainability reporting one. Of course, today, one of the legs is very mature, with lots of muscles, a good structure. The other one is a bit thin, and we might be limping a little bit. But what we can foresee, now don't ask me when, but what we can foresee, obviously, is a game-changing corporate reporting landscape, where there would be two, dimensions on an equal footing, with connectivity and coordination through the rest of the governance and the management. This is responsible capitalism, you call it the way you want. Maybe you have opponents too, that believe that, the hard monetary measurements are the only ones that are to be believed. But on the other hand, management goes well beyond monetary amounts and includes intangibles. I will say a word about that. Intangibles and sustainability matters. So, the CSRD is a major initiative, and Sven just explained, creating a mandatory regime of sustainability reporting in the EU that will be applicable, not only because there is a lead level one, so a legislative level, but also on the basis of standards, robust set of standards. I'm quoting Executive Vice President Dombrovskis in January 2020, just following the Green Deal. He said we need a revision of the legislative level, and we also need a robust set of standards. Because, to position sustainability reporting on an equal footing with financial reporting, well, no secret. You need the good principles, legislative level, but you also need regulations and regulatory level, i.e. standards. So, it's game-changing, mandatory for all large entities, and you all know that in the EU, large means not so large. Because we're talking about 250 employees if I take the employee criteria, which is pretty low. And that creates a lot of tension today. So that's why when I say we are on the path, but I don't know when the destination will be reached, the maturity, it's because it's a huge momentum, but it's also a huge effort for preparers. And as a consequence, the very large already under the NFRD, the current legislation, were applying, had to report. So they were in kind of a, if I call it the way regulators call that, sandbox, where you are playing a little bit and become serious, but it's not really serious today. So now we are becoming serious, but at the same token, we are talking on board, not only the NFRD people, but the other ones as well. And we also, the CSRD is encouraging SMEs to adopt on a voluntary basis the system, because the economy, sustainability is not a matter of a few companies, not of the large companies, but the economy as a whole. So that's what I wanted to say as an introduction. IFRAC has produced the task force, which I had the privilege of coordinating, so produced at the end of April this year, exposure costs, 13. Well, okay, they are a bit heavy, like 450 pages, so people say, oh, it's way too much. Reaction, natural reaction. But we organized the public consultation with two purposes. Purpose one is to make sure that we are okay in terms of relevance. Do we address the topics that we want to address properly? Do we give relevant, comparable, faithful information on the matters? Point one. That's the purpose number one. Purpose number two is say, okay, please screen if you feel that's too much. So, because the ultimate goal is important, but also the pace to the ultimate goal is as important. Because overwhelming entities with something that they can't manage is not the issue. Now, phasing in for us, is a key issue. So the consultation had two purposes. So we received the responses by August 8, 450 of them. But the reply to 450 pages is not one page, so it's a lot of work to analyze the feedback we received from participants. Very interesting, by the way, and 12% coming from outside the EU, and we are at the moment. My friend here is putting pressure on us because we are due to deliver the first set of standards in November. November is tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so I can tell you, EFRAG is working like mad to take on board the comments received through the consultation. Point one. Two, conduct further discussions at board and technical expert group level. We have two bodies, and if about 50% of the tech is composed of people that contributed to the task force, it is less so in the board, and that's natural. So I mentioned in passing that EFRAG created the second pillar to fulfill the role that the Commission, as the EU institutions have given it. So here we are. And why November? It's because the CSRD is telling us that we need to have the standards in delegated acts at the latest in June 2023 to be applied in 2024. So it means that the Commission has a lot to do between November and June, and I speak on because I've been explained. You have consultation of public authorities, you have the translation in the 24 languages of the EU, and you then have the scrutiny period of the Parliament and Council. So all of this takes time, as we know. I was discussing with Janine, and I said it's very difficult for me to understand US politics, and she said, well, it's not very easy for me to understand EU politics of the political system. A quick word, maybe, and maybe we'll have the opportunity to go back on that. Materiality and intangibles. Two key questions. Materiality, Sven mentioned it. In the EU, what is stated in the CSRD is double materiality. It means that we have to address the so-called inside-out risks called impacts, and the outside-in, the risks and opportunities for the entity. I think we need, and I encourage academia to continue working on this, because for me, it is extremely intertwined. You know, the two, it's very, very difficult to say that an impact has no financial consequence. It's very difficult also to say that an impact has no enterprise value significance. I still struggle a little bit, if not a lot, to say, oh, this impact is definitely without influence on my enterprise value, or my enterprise value is bigger than financial materiality, and so I think it's a great addition at ISSB level, because financial materiality, you immediately think in terms of cash flows. When enterprise value, you have to introduce not only the future cash flows, but also the appreciation by the market, by your discounting rates, and all of this, the reputational aspects, and that's key. So I think it's a great move. That being said, I still struggle a little bit between the impact that would have a consequence on financial, on enterprise value, and the ones that wouldn't. So this is, of course, something to be discussed, and to be academia has a role to play here. On intangibles, well, initially the view was, in our recommendations, we said, okay, we're moving to from financial reporting to sustainability reporting. What is sustainability? Is it only the impacts, the negatives, or is it also the positives? And okay, the CSRD to a large extent started, you know, recognizing the importance of intangibles, but I think it was felt that it was maybe a bridge too far to require a full reporting on intangibles. Intangibles are mentioned in recital 28, for instance. I suggest that you have a look, because it's a good summary of where it ended. It says that many indicators on sustainability matters have an intangible dimension, and they represent the intangible dimension. They recognize also that book value and enterprise value have a big gap in many sectors, and that can only be explained by intangibles. Because for me, and that's a personal comment, you know, I always think there is a paradox. People think when they address sustainability matters that in theory there are hidden liabilities, or that there are overstated assets, in which case you would reduce the book value. But if you reduce the book value, you increase the gap between book value and enterprise value recognized by markets. So where does it come from? So I hope we will integrate the intangible dimension into sustainability reporting in a second step, rather than creating a third leg, because walking on 3 legs is difficult. Thank you.
Even though some tables have 3 legs, but anyway.
But they don't walk.
So thank you, Patrick, for this large overview that was very interesting, and you put on the table important challenges. So now let me have the pleasure to introduce my left, women first, of course, Janine Gouillot. Janine has been the chair, the CEO of SASB, of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and after she took the same role as the CEO of Value Reporting Foundation, and after 1 year, Value Reporting Foundation consolidated, with the IFRS Foundation. So anyway, Janine has been absolutely essential at an international level to construct this new world where sustainability is now fully embodied in the foundation, the IFRS Foundation, that so far has been known only for the International Accounting Standards, or the International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS. And now, of course, inside the same foundation, there are 2 souls that, of course, need to integrate, need to speak. need to connect each other. And of course, in this journey that has been important, and Janine has been really the leading figure in this respect, there's also integrated reporting. That my old friend and beloved friend, integrated reporting, that is now inside the IFRS Foundation. So, Janine, please let us have your views on the journey that you've been leading at international level. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, and it's such a thrill to be here. I would never turn down an invitation to come to Italy, Stefan, as you well know. But a couple of things. First, for the record, I have to say I agree with nearly everything Patrick just said. So we are not, in fact, opposing forces. And I do think that and I'll talk a little bit more about this, I don't think the concepts of single and double materiality are fundamentally in conflict. I think one is a subset of the other, and they can coexist together very, very well. But I do want to say, I do think this is really a historic time in the development of accounting. And I started my career in accounting, and it's thrilling to be talking, I think, for everyone who's working broadly in accounting and business reporting. This is, I think, we're in the middle of the biggest evolution of the field that has happened in decades. And so to be sitting here in Italy talking about that, where double entry bookkeeping was essentially invented. I'm sorry I have to sound like an accounting nerd, but it's a bit of a thrill. It's a bit of a thrill. I'm talking to academics, so it's thrilling to be here. So I'm going to go back, talk a little bit about why I got engaged in the concept of what we might call sustainability or non-financial reporting, which I only got engaged in a little over a decade ago. And that is when I was Chief Operating Investment Officer for CalPERS, which is the largest U.S. pension fund. And I led development of our investment beliefs. And those investment beliefs were the overall guidelines for the principles for how to manage the investment portfolio, which is a global multi-asset class portfolio. And at that time, we laid out very explicitly that we wanted to integrate environmental and social and governance factors into investment decision-making because we believed they impacted the long-term risk and return and resilience of the fund. But there was a big barrier. That was a very big statement at the time. And there were other pension funds around the world, especially the Dutch pension funds, starting to make similar statements. But there was a very big gap between saying that you wanted to do that and actually being able to integrate those factors into investment decision-making in any kind of a rigorous or scalable or cost-effective way. And that gap was information and data and what I would call investor quality information. So investor quality information is information that is comparable, consistent, reliable, right? Comparable across companies, consistent across time periods, reliable. And that, the development of financial accounting standards is what produced that kind of information for traditional financial accounting. If you think about it, we take that for granted now. It didn't always exist, but it was really the development of the global financial accounting standard infrastructure that enabled investor quality financial information. So the question is, how do we get similar quality of information in what was traditionally called non-financial or sustainability? So I got very, very interested in that topic. That is why I joined SASB, which at the time was somewhat of a startup. And it was really built around three big ideas that I felt were really foundational to scale. One was the concept of industry-based standards, because if you were trying to produce relevant information for investor decision-making, industry-based was very important because that is how investors make decisions. They tend to compare performance of company A to company B within a sector, and then they're choosing companies within a sector. So this concept of industry-based standards mirrored how investment processes actually are run. So I thought that was very, very important. Then this concept of connecting sustainability to enterprise value, and how do sustainability impacts affect enterprise value. And I want to reiterate what Patrick said because it's so important. Enterprise value is a bigger concept than financial materiality. Enterprise value is the total value of the enterprise, and that includes the value of intangibles. So when you start thinking about how am I going to set standards through an enterprise value lens, that is a much, much bigger universe of information than, what as accountants we may have traditionally called financial materiality. Very important. And then the third idea at the time when SASB was launched and GRI was doing the same thing was this idea of how do you mimic the process of developing accounting standards and apply that process to sustainability information. And to me that's essential because it's the process of accounting standards development which creates buy-in and legitimacy to those standards is really important. That's what moves you from this is someone's opinion to, this is a consensus process of what information is important. And then I would add to that, ultimately, it's regulatory recognition. So the role that Sven and all of the regulators around the world play is an important addition to maturing the field. So that's when I got interested. I joined SASB about 10 years ago to help make all this, what I would say, this field mature to the point at which you get investor quality data. And it became clear that the whole voluntary, multiple voluntary initiatives, GRI, SASB, CDSB, that field, it was just too fragmented. Everyone was subscale. Too resource constrained, and it wasn't serving either companies or investors well. And so I became one of the people who was really involved in helping make the ISSB happen because that was a path to having fewer players, more scale, and especially an organization that could interact with regulators in order to create and implement what we call the global baseline. And again, that's not intended to be in conflict with the various jurisdictional initiatives around the world. The concept is, can we create a global baseline of sustainability accounting standards targeted at the information needs of investors that can then be used as an input by regulators around the world and then tailored as necessary in the different markets. But at least try to get investors this comparable level of data globally. So that was the concept behind the ISSB. As I think most of you know, it's now been formed, actually meeting this week in Frankfurt. 13 members have published 2 exposure drafts, one on general requirements for sustainability disclosure, one on climate-related disclosure, 1,300 comment letters. The team is working through those comment letters right now, and the team is also working closely with Patrick's team on how can we find commonality across these requirements to make it as easy as possible for companies to implement both sets of requirements. And then I'll just close with a couple of other things. In particular, I want to mention the IR framework. So I think where we are, I do think the double single materiality debate is overblown. I think the way to think about this is there is a universe of impacts. There is a subset of those impacts that is enterprise value relevant. The only way to reach a determination about where that line is drawn is through a standard setting process, getting the input of both companies and investors on that final decision. The integrated reporting framework plays an incredibly important role here. And when when ISSB issued both S1 and S2, to be honest, I expected the climate standard to get all the attention. And in some ways, I think the general requirements standard is actually the most groundbreaking of the standards, because it is the thing that establishes a requirement for the first time in accounting standard history to disclose all material sustainability information. And that is a very significant development. It uses many of the concepts from the integrated reporting framework to disclose strategy, governance, risk management of material sustainability issues, and to identify and then disclose metrics and targets for material sustainability issues. That is groundbreaking. I'm happy to say that it did in fact get, there was a lot of attention on S1, and people did pay attention to S1, and we have some very good and helpful comments on it. So I think that is very groundbreaking, and I think continuing, now that the integrated reporting framework is embedded in the IFRS Foundation, really does give us the ability to build that kind of more strong relationship between financial accounting and sustainability reporting than has ever existed before. And particularly the integrated reporting framework's content around business model, which I think is really an area that still needs to be continued to develop. So I'll just close by saying there are tons and tons of opportunities for academic research here. There are opportunities particularly around how sustainability impacts do impact enterprise value, how they impact the value of intangibles, how they impact pricing. All of those areas are ripe for academic research, and thinking about how company valuations and valuation models need to evolve to take account of a broader information set. So I'll just close. Historic moment, thrilled that all of you are here, and no shortage of work ahead for all of us.
Thank you, Julian, for such a passionate reconstruction of the history of the last 10 years. For being with us, of course. It's always a pleasure. So it's been quoted many times, GRI, and of course we have the pleasure here to have the new CEO, I should say nearly new, the CEO of GRI, that is Elko van der Ende, that he has a very interesting personal history as well. And he was telling me that GRI is changing its key, which is of course an important element of the picture. So it's with a great pleasure to have, to have here Elko van der Ende with us and to tell us more about the last new change.
Thank you.
Of GRI.
Yes, this works. So, well, hello. I am the skinny limping leg. Patrick kindly described me. And let me start with something completely different. Those people that say that the accounting and audit profession is boring and dull, they are wrong.
They are wrong.
Because this morning, when I was reading the Financial Times, and the interesting thing there is that, of course, we speak about sustainability reporting, anything new. Here, quote, investors criticize US accounting standards as outdated. And that's the financial part. Frustrated investors are demanding a shakeup of the top US accounting bookmaker, saying its outdated standards mean companies' financial statements no longer properly reflect their underlying businesses. And if you think of it, if you think of that one, and you think of the role of sustainability reporting and everything we stand for, I think that's a pretty accurate quote, because perhaps the whole system is a bit outdated, which is why initiatives as of the ISSB, together with SESB and of EFRAG, are so very important. But let me start with GRI. Yes, we are here for 25 years. We have a long history, and we are in fact a very simple organization with a very simple purpose. We enable businesses, investors and society to make calculated decisions on impacts based on facts not on perceptions. And we do so by providing top quality standards on impact-free and for the public good. And there's a bit of the NGO-ish niche of our organization. And what does that mean? That does not mean that we are an NGO, a not-for-profit organization, that we do not like profits. We do. The world cannot do without profit-generating companies. Why? Because they provide the needs to create jobs, to create the possibilities to invest in innovation, in sustainable energy sources, and in global happiness. It is more the question how they make the profits and how they use them, that the fact of profit making by itself would not be good. Yes, that means I'm the most capitalistic chief executive of an NGO in the world. So we support businesses. What has been happening the last 25 years? We have, of course, a sort of activistic background that not many people know. We have been founded in the United States. So I want to fight strongly against the perception that in the United States sustainability is not a topic that is interested to either investors or businesses itself. Of our 11,000 users that use our standards voluntarily, we have a couple of thousand US multinationals using them. What we have seen of the past 25 years, and before, by the way, I was in the profession, I was a partner at PwC, is that sustainability went from a leftish hippie type of thing by activists on making the world a better place to something that just involves doing good business. It is integrated in business strategies. And now it's time that we align the reporting and the accountability part of it into a global comprehensive framework that can be understood by all. Because whether you're activistic, whether you like capitalism or not, whether you have political ideas on the left side or on the right side, there is one thing that binds everyone. And that is transparency and comparable data. That you can use them to form a good opinion. And that is where we stand for, and that is what we try to achieve. What we've seen with sustainability, and I'm a former risk manager of a large international business, is that that's sometimes misunderstood, that sustainability and doing business has to do with long-term risk management. So what we currently see, unfortunately, in some states in the United States, like Florida, Texas, Idaho, West Virginia, where more or less there is a push towards investors or financial institutions not to be too ESG, if I may summarize it like that. And I've been thinking this one over also with respect to the so-called stakeholder capitalism movement. It is not only about sustainability. If you do not take global warming into account as a retailer, in your energy and your pricing models. As a platform organization, if you do not take social happiness, safe workplace, equal pay, diversity in account in your warehouses, and if as a mining company you do not take care of a proper risk management and monitoring and control system of your anti-bribery policies, you will face the dire consequences when things go wrong, even criminal persecution. These are not leftish, woke topics. This is doing business. You as a board have a bloody fiduciary duty to take care of these topics. If not, you will be held personally liable and your investors will be pretty pissed off with you. That has nothing to do with woke. And why would you as an organization that takes care of these important topics not report on them to show your investors you take potential risk seriously and to show to society that you care about these risks? So getting back to the intangible thing, I think the biggest intangible businesses have is their reputation. And this is very closely linked to all the issues we're currently are discussing with the ISSB and with EVRAC. And if you see that these 11,000 companies that voluntarily use our standards also use international accounting standards or financial accounting standards. A basic platform towards this global comprehensive baseline already exists. I think the biggest threat we have to deal with, and that's why it's so good you are here, and I completely agree with the necessity of more academic research and work into this field, is the topic of greenwashing. So we need audit standards around this. We need to see that both impact reporting and financial reporting are on an equal footing, equally important. And that means, in time, full assurance on sustainability reports. Why? Because it does matter to investors and society that the information provided is correct and verified. There is not one investor that will take a financial report serious without an in-control statement by an external auditors. In 10 years, ladies and gentlemen, the same will apply to sustainability reports. And something different. My experience with some boardrooms, and especially corporate communication departments, is that inflating sustainability data is seen as something like marketing, not yet on par with financial data. But if you provide your investors and public with inflated revenue data or with improved profit figures that are wrong, we call that financial fraud, and you will go to jail. So why would it be different for providing investors and society inflated data on impacts on, for example, net zero? Because those investors start to make decisions based on the information you provide them that is either willfully wrong or you're just not in control of your information. So let me end here. There is a huge opportunity for both academics as well as accountants, as well as anyone that is related to this, what I would call business transformation. It's a transformation of an economic model into the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, if someone had some doubts about the validity of this panel, got some answers, in fact. Wow. So many issues, really. From here now, we don't have any scheme, okay? So just for you to know, that is completely, we're going to invent the rest of the session with the topics that are being raised. Of course, we will ask them, our panelists, to talk about the future, of course, but maybe some of the topics is, can be already going to be discussed in a very free way. And of course, one thing, it's an interesting thing that emerged, is the fact that materiality, after all, Patrick said that, Janine said that materiality, financial double, with some Aperol Campari or anything like that, would be different, but would be not so relevant. And of course, the other important topics are intangibles, because the intangibles are part of sustainability. And now, of course, when we talk about intangibles at the international level, we could not avoid to ask Wiki, the World Intellectual Capital Initiative, WICI, to say something about this. So, to complete the picture of this panel is giving to you, we asked Mario Abela, that is the new chair of this organization, this Wiki, to come in, to provide the Wiki's view, and a bit to act as agent provocateur, in a sense, in this panel. So, Mario, please give us what is the view from Wiki perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefano, and thank you to the organisers for the invitation and to be in this beautiful city and in this beautiful country. And I come from Malta, which is just over there, so this is very familiar. I just wanted to say a few controversial things Firstly, just to correct the record, for those technical accountants, the word materiality is being misused a lot. So materiality only has one meaning. There is no such thing as financial, double, dynamic, triple, Campari, whatever it is. I think what people are really referring to, so there's a concept in financial reporting, and I think that's well understood by accountants, and I think that's what's creating a bit of confusion. I think the policy ambition is absolutely clear. I think the Green Deal, all the policy infrastructure that the European Commission has put in place, or is putting in place, is world-leading and is very clear on companies in terms of the direction. There should be no doubt about the direction. And I think when we're talking about double materiality, we're saying, hold on, these things are important. And I would argue, and I'll argue this afternoon, that when we're talking about double materiality, it's really at the level of the business model that we're saying, hold on, your business model has to look at both the money coming in, but also the impacts you're having on society. So anyway, I couldn't resist that one. I think on intangibles, let's not forget that accounting has a long tradition, and actually we have some very useful tools in accounting that we should not forget. So whether it's measuring intangibles, whether it's reporting on sustainability, we need to think about all the things we go through as accountants in terms of internal controls and all the things that we have around producing good quality data. And so let's not forget, when we're having this reporting discussion, that there's all that goes before in the preparation of the data to populate the report. And then, as Elko was saying, the other really important pillar is assurance. Because the reason we have assurance is because in the late 1800s we had lots of scandals, and as a result, this idea of having a third party look over the books of a company was introduced. And so this idea of non-financial and financial, I think the French have it absolutely right. If you look in the conceptual framework, that's a very arbitrary distinction. And the standard setters for many years have tried to define what is financial, what is non-financial. Actually, it's all information that's relevant. And where you kind of put the dividing line is becoming less and less important. And I think in terms of intangibles, we have been very good, and I do it myself as an educator. We all put up that slide and say, look, enterprise value, 80% of it is not captured in the financial statements. And then we stop and we walk away. We say, okay, yeah, we recognise that. So now I'm going to teach, and the students are going, oh, okay. And then, it's like, okay, now we're going to spend the next 6 months in financial reporting talking about the 20%. And, the students go, well, what about the 80%? Well, that's intangible. It's a bit like, the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. It was behind the screen. That's secret. That's over there. Let's not go there. But I think increasingly we need to, as a profession, as academics, to think about the how. I think the what is well established and the direction. For me, the really important thing is the translation. And I think, as Patrick was saying, we have to be careful we don't move too quickly, because then we get into a kind of compliance tick the box. What's the minimum effort required to get over the line? And I'm not suggesting that we move, at snail's pace, but we now need to go through a process of translation. And at the Value Balancing Alliance, one of the things we've seen with member companies is those that have really been able to integrate sustainability into their business model are those that have their boards engaged. So from a governance point of view, this is part of that. This is part of that conversation. It's included in management compensation, and it's part of that conversation. It's included in terms of the definition of performance and how people are assessed. You know, all of the things we know as accountants, we now need to think about, okay, so how do we translate sustainability from, to be honest, it has been in the marketing department for far too long. And, you know, if I had €1 for every time I've spoken to an investor, and they say to me, look, these sustainability reports are full of pictures. I can't do anything with the pictures. The pictures don't fit into my model. I need data. And yet, as accountants, we've kind of stayed away from that. It's like, oh, their impacts, that's for the, you know, people who don't wash their hair and, you know, the greenies. But actually, we have all the skills to do a lot of that stuff. It's just we are applying them to a broader set of information. And I think as academics, one of the really important things we need to think about over the next few years is how do we facilitate that translation process? Because, you know, it's not so simple. If you look at the CSRD, even if you look at the standards, in some ways that's an easy part. The hard part is actually to collect all the information, do all the reporting, make sure you get a clean assurance report at the end of it. So, in many ways, you know, let's not get caught up in precision, because if we talk about financial reporting, apart from cash, if you think about the balance sheet, every other number is an estimate. So let's not get too exercised by the fact, oh, sustainability information is so imprecise, and oh, I have to make a guess about some, you know, what future events will unfold. It's been absolutely the same in financial reporting. So, you know, let's not see this world as so divided, but actually these are similar sets of skills we can apply in taking a lot of this forward. And yes, there's things we don't know how to do. There's impacts we don't really know how to measure properly. But we have to start somewhere. For those who know the history of accounting, the profit and loss statement only came about after the Second World War. Before that, we only had balance sheets. And when the income statement was being introduced, there was huge controversy. People said the world was going to end, it's, you know, misleading, it's terrible. And now, you know, you never think of a set of financial statements without an income statement. In fact, it's kind of the key statement. So we have to start somewhere. And I think we need to, I think Patrick really gave the sense that we just need to move forward. Let's not get kind of bogged down in this is different, that is different. Let's just kind of find a way forward. Let's be pragmatic. Because this is important, like financial reporting is important. You know, if we think the future of our children is important, then they need well-functioning economies, and well-functioning economies need well-functioning capital markets. And we can't ever lose sight of the fact that companies will always need to make a profit, because investors will always need a return. So unless we change economic systems, and I'm up for that, although I think I'm going to take down my poster of Karl Marx and put Alco there instead. I think it was very convincing. But I think we just now need to, I guess, stop kind of looking at the problem and start thinking about, okay, so how do we go forward?
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. And of course, we will probably have a role to play in the next couple of years, I suspect. So, as I said, this is a bit the picture. The session is incredibly interesting, at least in my view, but I hope also in yours. There are so many topics that have been thrown on the table. Maybe I will ask what you think about the future, but maybe later. Maybe we can spend a few minutes about reactions to each other, in a sense that I think there's a new concept of sustainability. Maybe we use the same term, but as what Patrick said, what of course Janine and all of you really said, that sustainability is something more complex than environment and social, because it involves also enterprise value creation is in the directive, and intangibles. So I wonder if this is the first kind of topic that came to my mind. The other thing is the fact that, but once we get to regulations, is there a risk that all this sustainability transforms itself into compliance exercise? What can we do to avoid that? I don't think anybody in this table, sitting in this table, would like that, of course. We would like to see results, sort of concrete and positive results. It's a different way of business, making business, was Alko was saying. So, but lawyers are, I don't know how many lawyers are on this one, and maybe a couple of lawyers. So nothing personal, believe me. But in many companies, also in the US, for instance, lawyers are very important as to reporting. So how can we avoid or limit at least the risk of falling into compliance exercise? Assurance. Do we need to do something about assurance and the new assurance standards? Do we need to encourage, the institutionally speaking? Companies, Elke was saying, this is about business. Okay, stop saying that this is activism, making the word perfect or anything else. It's about business. It's a good way to risk management. So this has been echoed also by others. So what we can do to teach companies? I mean, of course, academia, of course, standard setters, of course, institutions. Maybe we need, some teaching, some training, because of course the reactions by many is a reaction that go away the devil. So in a sense, I'm just throwing at you a few questions. We know each other pretty well, so we don't need to really. Whoever would like to start, anything goes now. From now on.
Talk about intangibles, or did you want to talk about something else?
Something else.
You go first.
So Alko and Janine.
To Mario's point, with the introduction of the P&L, there are always counterforces of change. Always, you always see them. And the arguments you now hear against the introduction of mandatory sustainability reporting are in fact exactly the same arguments we heard with the introduction of international accounting standards. It will increase the cost of compliance. I have to share then business secrets. It will put Europe in a less competitive position. The topics that we will have to disclose are too difficult for people to understand and will create more questions. And history proves that this apparently is not true. So in order to speed up change, I think we need more research to have both quantitative and qualitative data on what the effects are indeed of the introduction of a certain standard, of a certain rule, of a certain regulation, and indeed to see if indeed it damaged the competitiveness of, in this case, euro, if indeed it increased the cost of compliance, outweighing the benefits, as was also mentioned. If indeed you release business secrets and so forth. So in driving this forward, academic research and more in-depth quality data on the effects of changes in reporting on both profitability of organizations, cost of organizations, or call it societal happiness, I think is something that we really need.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And to me, the reporting is not an in and of itself. It's does it influence or change decision making? And I think either business or investor or policymaker decision making and research on the impacts of reporting and disclosure, I think, is incredibly valuable. But I wanted to talk about intangibles, and Mario, I still think the balance sheet's the most important statement. But I do think the conversation about intangibles is a place where there's sometimes a disconnect between accountants and investors. And I think that one of the benefits of the entire sustainability conversation is that it's forcing tighter dialogue between the accounting profession, corporates, the investors, and policymakers. And when we talk about intangibles, I think we're pretty clear that there's a gap between book value and enterprise value. That gap is largely intangibles. But the question is, how do you provide insight into drivers of the value of intangibles? And you can either provide what I call operating metrics, that are metrics or KPIs that provide insight into the value of intangibles. So an example of that to me is employee retention, where employee retention is an operating metric, provides insight into the value of an intangible, which is the value of your workforce. That is a different thing from, I'm going to put the value of my workforce on my balance sheet, and I'm going to recognize an intangible on the balance sheet. And I do think one thing, and investors, in my experience, generally want the metrics because they want to then make their own assessment of the value of the intangibles, as opposed to they want the balance sheet actually loaded up with intangibles. But there are, I think, things that would be intangibles today that absolutely do qualify for recognition on a balance sheet, something like the value of data assets, right? So I think this whole conversation about intangibles needs a more explicit conceptual distinction between when are you looking for a metric that provides insight to intangibles versus when do you actually recognize an intangible on the balance sheet. And I think that's one of the huge benefits of having the IASB and the ISSB under one roof, because I see the recognition and measurement piece going through the IASB, the operating metric piece going through the ISSB. But anyway, that's the way I see it, Mario. I don't know what you think about that.
Thank you, Janine. Very important distinction. Maybe Mario and after Sven?
Sure. You're actually starting to cover my presentation. So I'll respond directly to that. But I totally agree with you, Janine, on the intangibles, and it is those metrics. Let's not just think about it's got to be on the balance sheet, because that's too narrow a frame really to be thinking about that 8% of value. I think one thing that's important, and this was a kind of aha moment for me, is if you look at the legal sociology literature, there's quite a lot of literature about how people don't follow laws, which for me, being brought up as a Catholic, you always did what it said. And I never really contemplated that, companies wouldn't follow the law. And the reality is companies don't necessarily follow the law. So for example, I co-chaired the study of EFRAG on the task force on business models. And we know from the research that was done, about 30% of European companies didn't report their business model. Now, that was a bit shocking for me because it's in the laws, so actually you should do it. But as part of my PhD, I did a whole lot of interviews with senior managers. And, when I posed to them this question about why don't I see this information in your reports, they said, well, what's going to happen? And I said, well, but you're not complying with the law. And they said, well, yes, but what's going to happen? I'm not going to jail. I'm not going to, no, there aren't any consequences. So actually, why do I need to comply? So I think that's something that we need to somehow collectively address in making the EFRAG standards and the directive actually work. Because the reality is, just because the policy framework is there doesn't necessarily mean people will follow it. Assurance, I think, will be a massive help in that exercise, but I think we need to think about all the levers, whether it's through corporate governance or other mechanisms, to make sure that we get, and enforcement as well. You know, all of those levers need to be pulled so that we do get more than kind of ticking the box, or even not even really following the spirit of the law, because I think it's really key.
Thank you, Mario. Any European, Sven, reaction?
Happy to react. Maybe I should say that at university they always tell us an anecdote that actually the library of the department where the most books get stolen is the theology department. So much for the trust in the religious background. No, but you brought up a lot of questions, Stefano, and maybe first to come back to the overall political situation that we're facing in terms of sustainability, and now I'm talking more about the EU than about the US, which maybe is even more complex. I think there is general agreement that we need to go there and that we want to go there, that is shared by everyone, that is shared by governments and stakeholders and industry and all that. But of course then comes the but, where everyone says, yes, it's hard, it's costly, it's overwhelming, you have to do it slower. And all of this is exacerbated by the current situation that we're in. I mean, we have an energy crisis, we have a cost of living crisis. We're being told, yes, fine, we can do that, but not now, because we're already grappling with so many other things. At the same time, interestingly, the current situation, I think, underlines the need to come to a more sustainable model. Because what do we need? We need energy independence, or at least we need sustainable energy sources. I mean, the solution now surely isn't to invest in gas and oil, but to move to other sources. But it costs, it's difficult, it's hard to make that step. And I think from a political perspective, and that's a huge challenge for the Commission, but also for other bodies, we have to kind of calibrate this process right, so that the door that has opened, that we get the foot in, and that we can slowly then kind of squeeze it more and more open. We won't be able to do it all in one go. We have to understand that in the real world this entails costs, but the push has to continue, and like Patrick said, we need to take the first step, and then others will follow. And maybe that's also a reply to the kind of what you said, that there's a danger of this becoming a compliance exercise. For the time being, I don't really see that danger, because there is a demand out there. I mean, we're being told again and again and again by financial market participants, by asset managers, by institutional investors, by pension funds, that we need this kind of information. We can't get the information, and if we get the information, we don't know, can we trust it, where does it come from, what is it based on, can we compare it with others? So I think maybe in, 5 or 10 years' time, and we face a bigger risk, but not yet. And then maybe final point on the assurance issue. Yes, very important. I mean, as I said, in the CSRD, there is first a limited and then a reasonable assurance requirement. We know that the IAASB has started working. I mean, they had a session just, I think, 2 weeks ago, started working on a process where they want to update their assurance standards by 2024, if I understand correctly. And of course, we're trying to work very closely with them to also get some basis for the assurance side of things. Thanks.
Thank you. Patrick.
Well, so many points that, I'm not sure my remarks are going to be well structured, because, I would like to give a reaction to many. I'm going to classify very quickly. First of all, I think that the key point is 2 points. What I would call the challenge of reliable data, and then the topics that we cover. Reliable data in sustainability or intangible or whatever, is key. At the moment, it's not okay, and everybody recognizes that it's absolutely not functional. So, we are at risk. And data has two big consequences. You manage better, you communicate better. So even for internal purposes, for management, you need data. So if the sustainability momentum was creating the realization by management that you manage with a broader set of indicators, it would be already a major achievement. The other point is that, of course, you communicate better. So either you believe that you need to keep your secrets secret, and that you protect your information, that competition shouldn't, etc. Or you believe that by innovation, you are in fact front-running, and in fact you leave your competitors behind. So it's a, if I may say so, it's a management option. You know, like the kind of, you know, am I in a protective mood, or am I in an exemplary mood? And that for me very key, very key. By the way, the pace of change. We all, at the moment, we hear a lot, and I'm sure that in the coming weeks we'll hear more about, you know, it's going too fast. You know,
Of course.
Elko illustrated very well. You know, I would like to say a word about the cost of not changing. Because at the moment, reporting entities are under heavy pressure. They receive questionnaires, an exponential number of questionnaires about this and that. And you know, in the cost-benefit analysis that EFRAG has conducted, we realized that anyway, you know, nature hates void. So, you know, people are asking for it, you know, because they need to be, you know, you have NGOs, but you have more importantly in terms of, you know, seriousness in the financial world, you have sustainable finance. You have lots of sustainable products that are sold. In order for those products to be reliable, they need data. So what do? They send questionnaires. Please answer. And you have fragmented, an exponential number of questionnaires, fragmented types of questions. So, you know, you started with one guy in the basement answering questionnaires. Now you are with 20 people answering, you know, so many questions that you don't realize in a business. So, you know, the cost of not moving is, in my view, extremely important. So we have to take that into account. Now, as regards topics, okay, on compliance, you will always have people that take regulation as a pain in the neck. You know, and this is, you know, this is the big debate between a Catholic culture and a Protestant culture, you know, where either you do it because it's required, or you do it because you feel it's right in your dialogue with God. So that's wonderful. So complying is for me, you know, just a final check that you have done the best for managing and communicating on your business. Topics. Well, I would like to say a word about the border between financial reporting and sustainability reporting. And I encourage, you know, EFRAG, but also IFRS Foundation, to make sure that there is the proper dialogue between the two pillars to organize proper connectivity. My personal opinion, and I say that, and I hope I will not be fired for that. The fire squad is, where is the fire squad?
Let me write it down.
In front of academics, I don't think that the conceptual framework of financial reporting should be revisited too much. I think there are key principles like, an asset is controlled or a liability is when you have an obligation. I mean, those two concepts provide a very sound, of course conventional, and of course with limitations, basis for financial reporting and cash flows. So, the more likely than not discussion that you probably have with your students is very important. But if we were blurring the more likely than not by, well, not so likely, or possibly likely, or likely in 10 years, you will lose people. So for me, the border between financial reporting and sustainability reporting is relatively clear and shouldn't be modified too much. Now, in sustainability, are we creating new borders within sustainability? My personal view is that there shouldn't be, well, it's not easy to decide on the border between enterprise value and other impacts. I also think that at the moment, the CSRD is covering part of the intangible KPI, potential KPIs, but not all. And that there will, either at a moment in time, in 5 years' time, the successors of Sven de Geltner will realize that intangible is not reported properly, and they will have the corporate sustainability intangible reporting directive prepared. No, I think it would be better to make sure that everything that is taken on board in terms of either corporate governance, by the way, or intangible, be an addition to the current CSRD scope in terms of coverage, in terms of topics, in order not to create more borders and the three legs I mentioned. In that respect, I take an example. When you report, when is it negative, when is it positive? If I report on my training efforts, if I have too little, it's a sustainability risk. If I'm okay, and even if I'm doing, if I'm in front of the pack, I create intangible. So, that's why I say there is an intersection currently with the topics covered by the CSRD and intangibles. Now, the reciprocal assessment is not totally true. In other words, if I take the capitals of integrated reporting, dear Janine, I would say that possibly there are some missing, and that are not covered. Will they be covered in due course? This is for, we have so much at stake that it's not easy to absorb everything in one go, but I would encourage to consider this point at a later stage in the evolution. When will sustainability matter and sustainability reporting be mature? I don't know, but in my dreams, sometimes I say by 2030 we should be about okay, reasonably okay. Maybe we will not have the income statement, but we will have the balance sheet.
Thank you for this. Any kind of counter reactions to this? Because of course new topics are coming on the table. So I wonder if you, before getting in the final showdown on the future, in a sense, I wonder if we have still a few minutes to counter react. Janine, I see you can't resist. I know.
No. I just want to echo what Patrick said about conceptual frameworks, which are essential to successful standard setting. And I completely agree. I wouldn't. I think the accounting conceptual frameworks, generally work. And I think the real focus needs to be on what is the conceptual framework for sustainability standard setting. And I think it leverages some concepts in the accounting conceptual framework, but you can't just pick up the accounting conceptual framework and apply it to sustainability standard setting. because of the enterprise value lens and because of the focus on metrics as opposed to recognition and measurement in the financial statement. So anyway, I just want to echo, I completely agree with Patrick on the accounting frameworks, and then to me, the real heavy lifting is what is that conceptual framework for sustainability standard setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just to throw sort of another important issue where we
Another bomb.
another little ball. So next time you won't come. But I'm sure many academics and professionals in this room think about the future, of course. And you know, here in front of them, there are very important institutions and standard setters, you know, with a concrete risk that there will be more than two legs, really. And this is, of course, something that very often also the OIDR Foundation, we have to deal with, because people ask us, you know, what will be the future? Just yesterday, I delivered a lecture at the University of Messina. There was a lady working in a company, and she said, you know, I'm doing the GRI, and now there will be EFRAG. Shall I dismiss the GRI and shall I take up EFRAG? But EFRAG is different. So she was, you know, she was very genuine and not naive in a sense, but she was really worried about their job. And so I wonder if we can also head in towards, you know, we have about 20 minutes. Each of you has a view about the future and what will be the challenges, but also please tell us what is your view about, you know, the maybe 5 years, 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years ahead, you know, which can be the evolutionary trend as well. Because in this moment, despite the fantastic consolidation process that Janine was referring to, that was unthinkable probably 2-3 years ago, but still we have important elements that may create big confusion in some companies at least. And so I wonder if you would like to give us your views about the future, and in particular about you know, the role that each of you has, which is an important role from its, you know, your own respective views and standpoints. I wonder if we would like to start, I don't know, maybe Sven, you would like to give us about something about what is the plan of the European Commission about the future, in a sense, and you know, there are other directives, and so I'm sure that many academics, please, we should also remember that many academics are not coming from Europe, so we can't take for granted that everybody knows all the details, of course. Thank you, Sven, and after maybe Patrick or Wells or whatever. I'll talk short. Yeah, please.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. I mean, we have now, if you want, established a framework, at least at the legal level, yeah, through the CSRD, which is a European framework. I mean, we have to be open and transparent on that. I think we didn't have the time and we didn't have the luxury, like in the financial reporting field, where we could build on something that had already been there and growing and established for 20 years. Here, I think there's an urgency. We all recognize that we do need to move, that we do need to take the first steps, and then that's why we decided we need a framework and we need it fast. Also because there are already demands from stakeholders, from investors, everyone to do this. So we have established a European framework and we are establishing European reporting standards. There's a clear timetable, how they're going to come on board, how they're going to be applied, how it's going to move from larger to smaller companies. But having said that, of course, we're very keen that this framework that we're establishing works also with the international framework and with existing initiatives like GRI and others. We're working very closely with the ISSB. We're really down to comparing line by line our text and trying to understand where we can align wording, where we can align concepts, where we can align definitions. Lots of challenges, of course, around that, because we're talking about two moving objects and you want to try and kind of make them move in parallel or at the same speed. Not very easy. We don't have exactly the same timetables. We also start with, say, a different scope. I mean, ISSB is general requirements and climate, while we go all across the board, E and S and G. But having said that, I also see this as a process over the next few years. I think we will have to accept that maybe in the beginning not everything works perfectly, maybe even within the EU. Let's be realistic, because this is new. This is a big piece of regulation that companies will have to grapple with. We will know that in the first years, maybe the quality of reporting and the extent and all that will differ between companies. I think also supervisors will have to recognize that. We'll have to accept maybe that there are in the beginning some differences also between us and the international level, which wouldn't necessarily have to be that we'll try everything to get it down to the bare minimum. But this is a process that overall I think I'm fairly confident, because we do share the same goals. And also when I see the cooperation that is taking place, as I said, between us and the ISSB, I mean, GRI has all along, I think, been very much involved in the EFRAG work. I'm pretty confident that over the next few years we'll see this converging. It's different from the financial side, because we're moving at a much faster speed, and for a reason.
Thank you. Thank you, Sven. Elko, I'm sure you want to say something about the future and the challenges, also for GRI. I don't have to tell you that GRI is, of course, the most used standard nowadays. It's not a secret. However, it's also an important actor of what is called the two legs approach, internationally speaking. So, tell us about the future from GRI perspective.
So, well, the question that was yesterday asked, should I still report GRI? Now we have EFRAG or SESB, or I get that literally on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And my answer is, of course you should keep reporting it, because it will be, in essence, it's a part of EFRAG, of the ESRS. In the two-pillar approach, it is integrated part with the work of the ISSB. You have the financial and you have the impact side, and they are closely aligned. So, of course, not doing it will be a pity, because next regulations you will see introduced, you will get it back. But having said that, I think we represent more a purpose on where we want to go to than a legal entity or a legal construct. So what that does mean for my legal organization in the next 5 years, I have no clue. But what I think is far more interesting is that where we stand for, the impact reporting side, will be embedded in the global comprehensive baseline and in the global reporting landscape for corporates. That, I think, is of crucial importance, to get indeed out there comparable data on these important topics. And then with that comes also the question, so why should we report voluntarily? Why should we report? I think it's important to understand that there are, of course, organizations and large businesses that have a strong sustainability angle in their strategy and strategic objectives. And you may ask, why would you need a regulator to start reporting on the endeavors you do in that respect? What we do know, and I got an interesting questions of a couple of foundations, if we would like to start progressing a concept of a standard for political engagements. And what does that mean? So there are some large businesses that have these wonderful net zero commitments by 2030 or whatever. But some of these organizations pay millions of dollars or euros to lobby groups that are fighting actively the introduction of anti-greenhouse gas legislation. And I think what I hope where the future will go to is that the interdependency and the connectivity between the various issues we are facing in sustainability, and to make more profitable, better social aligned organizations with that comparable data. I think it is very important that we, in the future, start to develop and start to see what it means. So what is the correlation between climate change and human rights? What is the correlation between environmental issues and good governance? You cannot see these topics as independent incidents or topics in your organization. Everything is related and cross-related. So what I predict for the future is looking at sector standards. That they will get far more attention, since they gave more insight, not in the topic, but in the entire value chain, in the entire supply chain. I think that is the future of reporting, or at least corporate communication towards society and towards investors. Why? Because it provides a better understanding on where the challenges are, on where the opportunities are, and on where certain topics indeed have a far broader impact than you would just find on your balance sheet.
Thank you, Elko. I would like to come back to Patrick. I'm sure Patrick is very happy to tell us.
That's okay.
To tell us how do you see your relationship with the EFRAG, with GRI and ISSB? How would you see the future?
Okay.
Did you notice that Elko talked about no more about global baseline, but global comprehensive baseline? Sorry, being an academic, I try to speak up.
You need probably to define those concepts in the conceptual framework to follow up on what Jamil was saying. You know, I have no crystal ball, but I think when I think about the future, I focus on 4 points. The first one, because we seem to, we have not covered this so much in this debate. The first point I try to follow, keep an eye on, is the mandatory versus voluntary, landscape. Because at the moment, to the best of my knowledge, a reporting of substance will be mandatory exclusively in the EU so far. So I know there are many discussions, but it remains to be seen if it's mandatory, on what topics, and for what companies, for which companies. So you know, the battle to create the same level of acceptance. We take for granted that financial reporting, it's mandatory, so nobody would think about having a voluntary reporting, like say, I have part of my balance sheet today, and tomorrow I will give another part of the balance sheet, and then the next day the income statement, maybe notes in the future. No, it is taken for granted, but we are not yet there at all. There is a political debate, and it's not finished at all. It is the beginning. And of course, the EU has taken a very clear stance. So maybe, at personal level, maybe I would be a little impatient to have something better, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but the key decision is that it is moving forward. This is a key decision, which has not been taken by many other jurisdictions, clearly. As an anecdote, I often discuss with my Japanese friends. And they say, well, we support, global initiatives, etc. It's wonderful. And then the next question is, what are you going to do with it? Because as you may know, for instance, global IFRS, the IFRS, global standards for financial reporting are optional in Japan. They are optional. Okay, so it's some sort of voluntary adoption. So we are in between. In Japan, you can report in accordance to Japanese GAAP, to US GAAP, with a limitation, with IFRS, or even, nobody has adopted, with JMIS, Japanese Modified International Standards. Nobody has adopted. But this political landscape has This is the first point. Sorry, I wrote a little too long. The second point I keep an eye on, and that's I'm addressing your question, is multiple reportings. It would be a nightmare for companies to have to produce multiple reportings, unless the lady you were mentioning wants to have an assistant and provide, have an increase, a unit to produce so many reportings. No, it's not the purpose of the exercise. So multiple reportings need to be avoided at all costs. That implies the dialogue, two-way traffic, to align wording, concepts, KPIs, to recognize differences when they are justified. And then, once you have done as much as you can on moving targets, as you mentioned, Sven, then you recognize that it's a step. And then you try also to organize digitization in a way where everything that is common, even if it's not, I say in my French, it's a millimetric, it's okay, it's so close. Remember, US GAAP and IFRS are mutually recognized. They are not the same, absolutely. From a detailed approach, they are not the same. Nevertheless, you can move to US markets on the basis of IFRS and the other way around as well. So I'm not saying this is the best solution, but I'm saying this is possibly a step. Third point, which I think is very key, I keep an eye on, is the understanding, the social acceptance of the momentum. I'm personally convinced that there are three competitive advantages for companies that move forward in that direction, but it might not be shared by everybody. The three competitive advantages are what? You manage better, because you, as I said already, you have a number of criteria that is broader than the pure financial. Two, you communicate better with all stakeholders, and responsible capitalism is based upon value creation. Business is a place where value creation is happening and where value is shared with all stakeholders. Investors, employees, suppliers, clients, it's an arbitration all the time. And any arbitration that is operating in a transparent environment is probably a lot better. And the third advantage is that you are confronted with the financing of your transitions. And you are going to attract money if you do that, because investors are looking for responsible investment. And therefore, if you are responsible yourself, you will get financing and at a lower cost. And the last point, which has not been mentioned too much today, is assurance. Yes, it was mentioned, but I would plead in favor. Some of you might have audit responsibilities, and this is a profession I'm coming from. Auditors are sometimes a little schizophrenic, because they would like an opinion to be expressed on sustainability reports, and that's fine. And the CSRD is providing for a step-by-step approach, limited assurance to start with, and moving to reasonable assurance in a second step. That's fine. It's not so easy, And then you have the other reaction of the auditors say, I don't want to take responsibilities, So they are willing to move forward, and they are also a little bit scared about the potential risks that they would be taking, in particular on forward-looking information. Forward-looking information, or supply chain, information on supply chain. How do I express an opinion on that? Will I make a qualified opinion, So the solution is a big dialogue on auditing standards, because they are not available today. But that's also part of the path to the ideal final goal that we all agree on. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And in terms of growth, and thank you for recap and for fundamental points. Janine, I think it's your turn to tell us about the future and IFRS Foundation future, and maybe if you can spend those couple of words about SEC and the American scenario from your perspective. I know that you like that topic.
I prefer not. I'm happy to. I think
It's not a bomb, it's a hot potato.
it's a hot potato.
That could explode.
In 2 minutes, right? So I think, and to build on what Patrick was saying about mandatory versus voluntary, and I think this is very much where GRI comes in, is that corporate reporting is driven by legal frameworks that are largely country or market specific. And the European Union is somewhat unique in having a legal framework and legal authority that enables the sustainability disclosure to become mandatory. That, and especially the concept of impact-oriented sustainability disclosure to be mandatory. That same legal framework does not exist in many markets, and it definitely does not exist in the US. The US legal framework and the legal authority of the SEC is very much limited to investor protection and information that is directly relevant to making an investment decision, which we would broadly call enterprise value relevant information. So that means that, and this is why the concept of building blocks and a global baseline is so important, because it's creating building blocks that can be used in multiple jurisdictions depending on their legal framework. And so we have always seen, if you go all the way back to the original conversations around the NFRD, GRI is an incredibly important building block that is very important in the markets that can mandate impact disclosure in the way the EU can. So GRI is the really important building block for impact disclosure in voluntary markets, including the US. So I just really, it's very important to understand these legal differences between what regulators in different countries can and are likely to mandate. And so GRI continues to play an incredibly important role.
And how do you see the future on IFRS Foundation? How do you
So I think
challenges or
I think the biggest challenge is definitely where do the ISSB, well, first of all, let's just say the standard setting challenge is not insignificant. I should probably say that first. I mean, 1,300 comment letters, and luckily I have not read 1,300 comment letters, but I have read summaries, and the opinions are all over the map, right? So you've got, the reality is global, multi-stakeholder standard setting is very challenging. So the first challenge is really just continuing to build out that standard setting process. But then after that, it is the interaction with the 140 jurisdictions around the world that currently use IFRS standards, and how will those companies use those countries use the ISSB standards. And that is very complex, because that means every single country has to make a decision about what is their process for using the standards, and do they use their existing accounting endorsement process? Do they set up a new sustainability standards board? Do they just take the standards as is? So that whole process of interfacing with all the jurisdictions is very complex. And the beauty of IFRS is they have the relationships and they have worked through those processes on the accounting side, so there's a wealth of learning and experience to then apply that on the sustainability side. And I think I'm getting the hook. I see Daniela.
Thank you, Janine. Well, at least. And Mario, I mean, you're chairing, you're leading Wiki. Intangibles keeps on popping up from time to time, a little bit of shyness and go down again, and Trick was raising this. Maybe also the new CSRD will help, of course. But how do you see the role of Wiki and possibly, of intangibles in this complex picture?
So I think the CSRD and the Green Deal represent a kind of revolution in accounting, because both non-financial, financial are going to be mandatory. The way I see the future is that distinction will dissolve, because once you have companies reporting under the IFRAG standards, how they're responding to climate change, it will follow that auditors will be starting to ask questions about whether or not assets in the balance sheet should be impaired. So I think that connectivity will change, and we will start to redefine the entire package and see it as one package, not as parcels of information. So, and I see intangibles as really the glue, because I think there's now a fairly clear understanding that value creation happens in relationships between entities and their stakeholders. And as a result, I think that that's going to, understanding that value creation process is going to be much more important than it has been in the past. And I think it's going to elevate the whole topic of intangibles and the need to have comprehensive information to actually understand how your business is going to perform in the future. Because traditional accounting is based on assumptions. Those assumptions no longer hold. So financial reporting is founded on basically models where the future's linear. And if you think about the way we calculate discounted cash flows and whatever, we usually imply some sort of growth rate, and we imply some sort of linearity. And I think what we're seeing today is we had COVID, it's been one thing after the other. So the business landscape has changed. We're now in a landscape where, people talk about a VUCA world. It is volatile. We don't know what's going to happen next. And I think we're going to really have to start to examine a lot of the assumptions. So I don't think it's about conceptual frameworks. I think it's about how we apply current accounting. And I think current accounting, we're still taking a very narrow view of the future. And I think the way we think about the future needs to change. And I think that's where intangibles will become really important in terms of giving a sense of, well, is this business sustainable as a business or not? Because I think that's a key question.
Thank you, Mario. So, one word of closure. Thank you, first of all, to all the panelists. The quality of this panel I don't think needs any comment, but which it might be taken both ways, but I understand that there might be some ambiguity there. I understand that. But that's the beauty of academia. So, a couple of notes, too many, of course, topics. The concept of sustainability is changing. It's incorporating enterprise value, value creation, good business. Sustainability is about good business and risk management. So sustainability entered the main, the mainstream, but at the same time changed a little bit, twisted the meaning. The implications have been twisted. The other thing is, of course, there are other topics like the value chain we didn't touch, unfortunately, the SMEs. But still, what I can see, there's a genuine intention to collaborate, which is, I think it's important for all of us, for companies, of course, but also for academics. I notice sometimes in the academic literature, just a kind of a juxtaposition mood, instead of being, not helping, but contrasting and comparing. So I think from what this panel is saying, and key people around me. Clearly, the academia can be very useful, can be critical, of course, but at the same time assisting and helping with research that is relevant to this topic. After all, we belong to the same system, and provided that, of course, we don't change system, as Mario said, we still working in a capitalistic system. The role of accountants is also an interesting thing. I remember Karl Marx has been quoted, said that the accountant is the slave to the capitalist. I suspect now the accountant has to take a new role, of course, much more complex. Also for auditors, I'm looking at a partner, my friend of KPMG there, they was looking at you with a little bit of worries. Patrick?
No sweat.
So I think also the role of accountants has to change. And after all, before Janice quoted the birth of double entry, and in this country, I mean, why we still have accounting is because accounting has changed through the centuries. I mean, it has been able to adapt through the centuries. Otherwise, it should have been dismissed because, of course, demonstrated over the centuries the capacity to adapt to business needs, and that's why we still have accounting, I suspect. A final word for your consideration that's absolutely from me. I think that you all operate in the public interest, and I think it would be very important to make sure that the members of the people working in your committees should be, the best in town, so to speak. So in a sense, it's like universities. When we have to choose people, there will be a selection process and there will be full transparency. So I think, if I can, just an idea to throw a little bomb, but no response, it would be very useful to have, more transparency and a list of people applying, because like academic, competitions, we have, a list of possible candidates, and of course there's a selection process, fair enough. But, transparency, I think it's an interesting element also for you that operate in the public interest. Because sometimes, we know the outcome, but we don't know anything about the process. So just a thought for the future, you work in the public interest, I mean, you have to be transparent first. You are, in a sense, especially if we talk about reporting. Anyway, it is just a final idea. Thank you very much. We're a bit late. I would let's start with 5 minutes, so 11:25. Okay, and so we move everything by 5 minutes. Thank you. I'm sure you will like to thank this fantastic panel.